Man's country western. Oh, why are we so far ahead? Back, I tell you. It doesn't want to play. There, that's where I want to be. Okay. All right, so we've been plotting our way through the book of the Revelation. Before I start, I just want to mention, I just found out because Chris has just told me, Chris has been attending worship with us for the last year. He's heading back to Korea on Friday. I've got that right? So this is his last time with us. This will be today. So if you want to say arrivederci to Chris after the service, he will be missed. It's nice to have had him here. You can hear his voice singing out during the worship service, and so you're going to be missed, Chris. So thank you so much for spending time with us. Will you be back? Will you? You're not sure. Your visa is finished. Yeah, so he's got to go back to Korea. Okay, so we've been working through our way of the book of the Revelation, and what I've been saying from the outset is that I wanted to approach the book of the Revelation from a particular perspective. I think that the book of the Revelation is answering one big question that is important for those 7 churches that John has written to at the beginning of the book. And the question he's asking is, who is in charge of the world? And the answer he gives very clearly from chapters 4 on to the end of the book is that God, the Creator who reigns on the throne, is in charge of the world, and his Son, Jesus, the Lamb who is slain, is co-reigner with him. And so who reigns sovereignly over all is the Lamb who was slain. So to who is allegiance due? The God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ. That God is the God to whom we should be giving our worship and allegiance to. As I've been saying in the front of the, at the beginning here, one of the problems that we have with the book of the Revelation, amongst many, is we tend to divorce the first 3 chapters from the rest of it, because the first 3 chapters are at least comprehensible for most of us. So we can read those things and then we make a decision, which kind of church are we? Are we the church of Ephesus? Are we the church? And this is how we approach it. And because chapters 4 to the end are so weird and wonderful, we just kind of ignore them because we don't get it. Or we do the exact opposite and we just obsess on the weird and wonderful and try to speculate on all the futuristic methods of what's going on there. And we see the book of the Revelation as cartoon headlines of the future. And we try to figure out who's the Antichrist this week. And I get that it's all exciting. But what we do by doing that is we do a disservice to those 7 churches in the beginning of the book. And I want to approach the book of the Revelation as a whole. It's one entire text that was written by John to real churches in real circumstances in real places. And the things that John writes from chapter 4 afterwards meant something to those churches. And so if we can understand what it was like in the 1st century AD and what was going on for those churches, it helps us, at least as a first port of call, to understand what that text means, and then knowing what that text means to apply it to us today. And that's absolutely no different than any other book of the Bible. We went through the book of Galatians, for instance, recently, and we spent a bit of time thinking about what was going on for Paul's church and why was this letter being written, and then having understood what was going on there, then thought, okay, what does that mean to us today? And so that's how I want to approach this text. The answer to the question of who reigns overall is responded by the God who is the Creator, who sits on the throne, and the Lamb who was slain. It's a theological answer, but in the context in which John is writing it, it's also a political and economic answer. And that shows up really strongly in the rest of the letter, because what John is doing is challenging the Roman Empire and the Roman imperial system. Revelation, or the Greek word apocalypse, is a word which means an unveiling. What God is doing through the words of John's revelation is pulling back the curtain and saying, have a look at what's going on behind the scenes. You see all this stuff happening in your world today. Here's what's going on behind the scenes. And so there's a spiritual unveiling, and this is what the book of the Revelation is doing. And what I'm saying, that the big idea here is that as Christians, we're called to obedience, service, in the face of secular structures that seek to steal your heart, your mind, and ultimately your soul. John, in his first letter to his readers, in his first letter says, don't love the world. And so in one sense, the book of the Revelation is an explanation as to why you should not love the world, because the world is a mess. And so what we're looking at in the book of the Revelation is behind the scenes of what's going on in the world and what the world actually looks like. And it's described in this fantastic kind of language. This is the third of the messages. Last week we looked at the big picture of who rules and who's worthy of our worship and what should that look like. And today we're going to look at this big idea of empire. And Revelation, in a big way, is a critique of empire. Excuse me. So we're going to start in Revelation in chapter 12. We're going to look at Revelation chapter 12 and 13 and 17 and 18, but we're not going to look at it in detail. Like I say, I'm standing way back and just looking at the big idea that impresses us. What would John's church have understood, and then think about what that means to us today, rather than trying to determine who in the future is this speaking about. Revelation in chapter 12, and starting at verse 9. And the great dragon was thrown down, the serpent of old, who's called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of our Christ have come, for the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down, the one who accuses them before our God day and night. By the way, the word Satan means accuser. And they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life, even when faced with death. For this reason, rejoice, you heavens who dwell in them. Woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you with great wrath, knowing that his time is short. I want to jump to verse 17. So the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So the first big idea that we're going to get here in these two chapters is that the devil is being described here as a dragon or a serpent. And the devil or the dragon or the serpent that's being pictured here is confined to earth. His access to the throne of heaven is lost. So you remember Job, he was walking in heaven and he speaks to God in heaven and has access to heaven and accuses Job in front of God in heaven. Well, now what we're seeing here is that he's lost that right. And so he's angry and he knows his time is short, because now, having lost access to the very throne of God, he realizes his time is short. Chapter 12 is basically telling us the story of Christmas. You're going to have to advance this for me because it's ignoring me. Oh. Chapter 12 and verse 4 speaks of a woman who is a picture of Israel. And she is going to give birth to a child, and that's the Christ child. And the serpent stands waiting to devour the Christ child. Chapter 12 is a picture of the Satan's attempts to destroy Christ. And you read about that in practical terms. That happens you read it in the Gospels. Herod is the actual face of Satan doing this destruction of Jesus. You might remember Herod calls the destruction of all the children 2 years and under. Here is the attempt to destroy the Christ child. Who is the face of Satan that's going to destroy the Christ child? In this language, from what John is saying, it's actually Herod. It's actually the Roman Empire. It's empire that's seeking to destroy the child, the Christ child. That's the picture that John is painting here. And so when he was unable to destroy the Christ child, and after persecuting and trying to destroy the Jewish people and failing, we read in chapter 12, verse 7, the dragon was enraged with the woman and went off to make war with the rest of her children. Having not been able to destroy the Jewish people, he went off to destroy the rest of her children. And who are the rest of the children? Those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus, the church, the saints. And so the picture that's being painted here is that Satan had tried to destroy the people of God, the Jewish people. Then he tried to destroy their Savior, the Messiah, and failed. And so now Satan is embarking on an enterprise to destroy the church, to persecute the church. He tries to destroy the Christ child, and failing to do that, he does the next best thing and tries to destroy the church. And this is why we know that Paul says in Ephesians, we wrestle not with flesh and blood. The reality is that the church is not wrestling with empires like Herod. We're not wrestling with Hitlers of the world. We're wrestling with a spiritual wrestling. There's a spiritual power behind the face of empire. And this is the point that John is trying to emphasize. And this is the thing that Paul says, that we wrestle not with flesh and blood, but with spiritual powers and principalities in high places. This is the picture that John is painting here. And so the big idea is that the church has been, and it continues to be, engaged in a spiritual war. The Jews have been engaged in that spiritual war since Abram, and now the church. Which raises the question, how is it that the that Satan is going to attack the church? How is Satan going to wage war with the church? And the answer is given in chapter 13, verse 1, by means of two things, the beast from the sea and the beast from the earth. So chapter 13, verse 1, the dragon stood on the sand of the seashore, and then I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on his horns were 10 crowns, and on his heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, and his feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like that of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his throne and great authority. Now, the thing to note about this picture here is that this is an amalgamation of the picture that you get from Daniel in Daniel chapter 7. In Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has this vision of empires. One is like a leopard, and one is like a lion, and one is like an eagle. And he has these pictures of empire. The heads and the crowns, they could mean something very specific, an exact number of kings, an exact number of thrones. But in a general sense, this is just a picture of perfect authority and power. Whoever this amalgam of empire is, has perfect authority and power to rule on the earth. This is his picture here. And it's an amalgam of Daniel's vision in Daniel chapter 7. It's a picture of empire. And in the case of John's readers, no doubt, this is the Roman Empire that's being painted a picture of here. But because it's an amalgamation, it means from a bigger picture view, this is an image of any empire. This is true of any empire. This isn't just one particular empire, but it's all empire. And if you go to chapter 17 and 18 of the book of the Revelation, John uses a picture of a dragon, and he uses the name Babylon. Now, Babylon is a long since dead empire. So why is he using the name Babylon? He means Rome by using the name Babylon. By using that generic name and by having an amalgam of every previous empire that ever existed, what John is trying to paint here is that the means by which the dragon, Satan, is going to make war on the saints is by means of empire. Any empire, all empire, past empire, present empire, and future empire. In the first century, this is certainly a critique of Rome. But for us today, it's a critique of any empire that seeks to establish itself in the place of God. The critique of empire in the book of the Revelation is a universal critique for all empire, past, present, and future. And so the answer to the question, how is Satan going to make war on the saints? The answer is by means of empire. And then there's this next beast. There's the beast from the earth. Sorry, I lost my page. Starting in Revelation chapter 13, verse 5. A mouth was given to him, speaking arrogant words and blasphemies, and authority to act for 42 months was given to him. And he opened his mouth in blasphemies against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle, that is, those who dwell in heaven. It was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. And authority was given to him over every tribe, people, language, and tongue. And all who lived on the earth will worship him, everyone whose name has not been written since the foundation of the world in the book of the Lamb who has been slaughtered. He's speaking here about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is personified as having a voice, has personified as blaspheming, is personified as persecuting the saints. Then verse 11, I saw another beast coming out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke as a dragon, and he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and makes the earth and those who live on it worship the first beast, whose fatal wound was healed. And it's jumped down to the very end here. Here is wisdom. Let he who is understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So there's this picture here that's being painted, not only of an empire, but now one who comes and speaks with the authority of the empire. And again, this picture here, the way to figure this out is to look at this idea of 666. Now, this idea is really exciting for people, right? This really gets your mind going. And I'm demonstrating some of the ways that this has been perceived in modern culture. Google, if you want to think about it, is really 666, so you shouldn't use Google Chrome, right? Because that's the devil's thing. Walt Disney, 666, right? There they are. You can see it in red. And even to this moment today, there's an organization in the States called, a company in the States called Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby is a Christian-founded craft store. And they don't use barcodes in their shop. We were in there, I don't know if you were, we went there. I went there to buy some stuff with my sister last year when we were in America. And they use every manual entering everything at the register. They won't use barcodes because the barcodes are the mark of the beast, right? 666 is in the barcode. And so they won't use barcodes. So we get really, really excited about this number. Now, none of that would have made any sense at all to John's readers. It's possible that that's true. I'm not going to disregard it entirely. It seems fanciful. But what we really want to do is understand what John is saying to his people. And there is this thing that the Jews used called grammateria, and it's this process of assigning a number to every letter, and then taking the letters for Nero Caesar, calculating it out, and coming up with 666. Calculate the number. It's the number of a man. This is what he says. This is almost certainly saying this is Nero Caesar. Now, the point that's being emphasized here by John is that the dragon is going to make war on the saints by means of empire, and every empire has a voice, a face, an emperor, a leader. And in this case, in this instance, he's speaking about Nero Caesar. But in a general sense, it's always going to be, there's always going to be a voice of empire that speaks and acts on the sake of the empire. And the idea of a mark on the forehead and right hand can, of course, have future applications, but how John's readers would have understood it is coercive control that decides who can have peaceful acceptance in the society. It's the empire's stamp of approval. Citizen in good standing. Do what we say, give allegiance to us, Rome and her leaders, be a full participant in our culture if you want to be able to function in our culture and its system and its economy. And often this looked like participating in the guilds and engaging in emperor worship. The leader that John speaks about is the mouthpiece for the propaganda of the system. And in this case, it was Nero. In our day and age, it's whoever happens to be leading the empire of concern. And it's blasphemous because it uses the language, who is like the beast? Who can make war with the beast? And that language is a language and question that comes straight out of the mouth of Yahweh followers in Exodus chapter 15:11. Who alone is like you, Lord? So here is this picture of the saints declaring to God, who is like you? And what you have here is mimicry. You have Satan, who is a false kind of God picture, and you have the empire, which is the false kingdom, and you have the leader or the voice, the lamb, who is the false Messiah. And Satan seeking to simply replicate in a phony way the propaganda, in a phony way, what God is hoping to ordain in his kingdom to come. So let's think a little bit about some application. What John is doing here, the application for us here, he's speaking particularly about Rome. The dragon, the serpent, is the spiritual energy behind a particular empire, which is Rome. And the voices and the propaganda and the voices for the propaganda are the leaders of Rome, in this case, Nero and the other Caesars that existed in John's day. But kingdoms have come and kingdoms have gone. There are kingdoms, there are the ancient Chinese kingdoms, and there were behind those ancient Chinese kingdoms was a dragon, a serpent. And behind him were their leaders who spoke. And there are the South American kingdoms and empires. There has always been kingdoms, and there's always been empires, and there's always been the cults of empires, and there's always been leaders of it. And all of this, according to John, is designed ultimately to destroy the saints, which is a very saint-centric way of looking at things. So I want to ask the question, what are the characteristics of empire? that show up out of this text. And first is that they're a blasphemous self-glorification. Empires of the world establishing themselves as a substitute for God's kingdom. And they do it by means of rights and politics and constitutions and bills of rights. And the story it tells of its own glorious history and God-established authority, its music, its culture, its language, etc. Every nation has this. Empires just have it on steroids. Empires see themselves as God's chosen people, set up by a false or substitute gods to bring his will to earth. And hence, they're blasphemous. Blasphemy effectively means to slander Yahweh, to detract from Yahweh, to assign to something other than Yahweh and his purposes that which belongs only to Yahweh. It can be overt, as in the case of Rome, or it can be covert and benign, as in the case of the U.S., which makes claims to be a Christian nation, set up by God to do his will on earth. I blaspheme Yahweh when I use his name to do my will and call it his. Another phrase for this is taking his name in vain. Empires blaspheme Yahweh by daring to declare that they alone are chosen people to do his will on earth, which then gives them license to act any way they choose. And what the Revelation is demonstrating is that empires, all empires, past, present, and future, are spiritual entities, even if they don't acknowledge it or recognize it, because the spirit behind empire is not God, it's Satan. Secondly, empires always establish themselves by military force. Who is able to wage war with the beast and with the empire? And note again the phrase that's repeated in chapter 12, verse 7 and chapter 13, verse 17. Chapter 12, verse 17. Satan is going to seek to make war with the saints. And in chapter 13, verse 7, it was given to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. The ultimate focus of the dragon's use of empire is war with the saints. Now, of course, there is a secondary benefit to Satan, and this is the destruction of shalom and sorrow and death for all of mankind, who are the collateral damage in his obsessive desire to kill the woman and her child. To use a modern-day picture, the Russian country of Russia is seeking to destroy Ukraine and its leaders and its culture. And if it means that they have to kill a whole bunch of civilians in the process, well, that's just the collateral damage, because the focus is the government. So true with Satan. His focus is the saints and the people of God. If a whole bunch of other people who don't believe in God and Christ are collateral damage, so be it. The target is the church. This is a highly saint-centric view, but this is what John is highlighting, and that all the world's empires that ever were and ever will be are focused ultimately attacking God and his people, and they do it by setting up military might and coercive strength. Every empire establishes itself on the might of its army, which it sees as its God-given right to establish its name rather than God's on the earth. Winning wars proves that God is on your side. What's really interesting to me, I've been reading about the American Civil War. Both sides were convinced that God was on their side. Both. Both proclaimed to worship the same God. I just read a story just the other day of a man whose dad was a Lutheran pastor in the South, and he's singing hymns that God have mercy on me as he's laying in a place where he had been wounded. He's fighting to support and encourage and uphold the right to hold slaves, and being killed by a whole bunch of other Christians who say, no, you don't. This is what empire does. And third, and lastly, the idea that's common in all empire, not only is this idea that they're God-ordained and they use military strength to enforce their opinions and their way on the world and say God is doing it, is opulent wealth, but only for some. Ostentatious, opulent wealth, but only for some. In Revelation, in chapter 17 and verse 4, we read the whore that rides the beast, and she's dressed in purple and red and has jewels and a cup. She's adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, and holds in her hand a gold cup. In Revelation 18, we read that Babylon has fallen, and all her luxury and wealth has gone with her, and all the kings of the world mourn. One example of empire is that the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Great opulence on the surface, but under the surface, great poverty and need as well. But empire only wants to show you its shiny baubles, not its rotten core. Empires establish themselves on divine mandate, which is anti-God, anti-Jehovah, blasphemous self-glorification, military prowess, exhibit economic and cultural exploitation and control over vast regions, are pridefully arrogant of their place in the world. There is no real shalom in empire, no justice, no righteousness, and never has been, and never can be, because behind all of empire is Satan. And you contrast that with the kingdom of God, which rules not by might, but by laying down our lives. People who overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Blessed are the poor, because theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so to sum all of that up, I missed it, but to show you how it works. This is the American empire. We as Americans convince ourselves that we are God ordained, that we have manifest destiny, that God is on our side. And we decide this is true because we have convinced ourselves that we're established as a Christian nation and we support Israel. So of course God will bless us. This is what we say as Americans to ourselves all the time. And therefore our empire, the American empire, has got to be God ordained, and therefore any other empire must be evil, like the Russian evil empire. But all the things that are true about empire are true for America. It establishes itself on unequal opulence. It oppresses itself and oppresses others. You might think that America is this great country that supports the world. Ask the slaves. Ask the American Indians. How Christian was that Christianity? And this is flat out blasphemy. This is just blasphemous. This is the voice. This is the second beast. The first beast is empire, the United States, its government, its rights, its politics, its culture, its whatever. And the second beast that comes from the earth is its mouthpieces, in this case, Donald Trump. It doesn't have to be him. And behind all of this is Satan. This is blasphemous. And there's a huge section of the American church that supports this. But it's not just him. This is Vladimir Putin and is one of his senior generals. And that guy on the left there in the white is the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church, who has ordained the right for the Russians to move into Ukraine and kill, and has established a holy war and promises that those who kill in this war, that all their sins will be washed away. Because God has mandated that empire, who establishes itself by military power and opulence for some. And the third empire that we live with in this world is the Chinese empire. Now, the interesting thing about the Chinese empire is that they have just ignored religion. The religion for the Chinese empire is secular Marxism and secular socialism, but that acts as a religion in that culture. But all the other marks of empire exist here in the Chinese history as well. They saw themselves with the dynasties as God mandated. The difference now is that there's no God, it's just secular Marxism that's the God. And then there are little empires in our world today, Iran, Korea, North Korea. There are little empires that exist around the world today. And all these things are empire true. And the point that's being made by John, speaking about Rome specifically and generalized for us today, is that all empire eventually seeks to establish itself as a fake kingdom on earth. No matter how benign it may seem, no matter how good we might think our liberal democracies are, behind them all is Satan. The Satan and the devil is the spiritual energy behind all empires. The beast from the sea is the systems of empire, their culture, their history, their myths, their religion, their wealth, and their power. And the beast from the earth is the emperors and leaders of the empires, the mouthpiece or the face of the empire. Now, like I said before, there may be some real super duper futuristic stuff associated with all this. I'm not dismissing it, but none of the futuristic stuff that we think about when we think about the book of the Revelation would have made any sense at all to John's readers. This is what they would have got. This is the point that John wants them to get, because they find themselves in the midst of an empire that seeks to oppress them. And so this is how the devil wages war on the saints, or persecutes the saints by means of empire. Through the temptations of wealth, the temptations to power, and the temptations to apostasy that empire causes us to fall into. When you read through those 7 letters to the churches that John writes in chapters 2 and chapter 3, all 3 of these things show up as the condemnations or concerns that he has with those churches. In Ephesus, it's probably all 3. They left their first love. In Smyrna, it's probably wealth and power. In Pergamum, Thyatira, and Sardis, it's probably apostasy. In Philadelphia, the issue is power. And then Laodicea, the issue is wealth. John is writing to churches to tell them to not fall into the trap of these temptations. And this is the application for the church today. The reason I wanted to do this series of Revelation and do it this way, I'm largely driven by what I am perceiving that's coming out of the United States and the impact it will have ultimately on the satellite empire countries of the Empire of America, which is Australia, and the rest of Western democracies. And what's going on in the United States in the church and its dedication to Trumpism and that kind of view of the world, eventually it'll just show up here. And so the church globally has to recognize that we're going to find ourselves falling into the temptations of wealth, power, and apostasy. When you think about wealth, look how the wealth of the Western world has caused the church to be lazy. John speaks to the church of Laodicea. You're neither hot nor cold. You think you're wealthy, but you're not. Are we not in the Western church, Laodicean churches? Look how wealth, and prosperity gospel has diluted and polluted the message of the gospel. The means by which Satan is persecuting the church is through the benign freedoms of our Western liberalized democracies. Do you remember the book of Daniel and those 4 boys, young men who were taken captive? The slaves were given the choicest in order to win them over. The king offers them the best of empire. He offers them a lifestyle they could never have without his support. And it's tempting for the church to want to walk into bed with power of the empire and receive the benefit of empire so that we might enjoy the benefits of it. Satan persecutes the church, as we see in Laodicea, by lulling her to sleep. Neither hot nor cold. It's very effective. Where is the church growing the greatest? Not in the West and its comfortable laziness and wealth, but in the places in which persecution occurs through strength and oppression. Or the church is tempted to get into bed with government or to hold the reins of power, but to do so is to fall for the temptation of power and fails to recognize that powers and empires, no matter how seemingly benign, are the principalities and power of Satan. You see this now with the Russian Orthodox Church. You saw it with the Protestant churches in Nazi Germany, and you're seeing it with many, many of the Protestant churches in the United States right now. A willingness to try to grab hold of the seat of power. Now that's different than seeking to influence power for the sake of the common good. We as a Christian people, we should be seeking to influence government. It's not a sin to do those kinds of things. It's not a sin to even become the president or prime ministers of such countries, but we have to recognize that I'm a Christian president, not a president for Christ. It's a different kind of thing. I'm not called, the church is not called to establish foreign policy and inform the government, this is the way the policy should be. The governments are not called to be theocracies. We're not called to be like Iran. It doesn't mean I can't be a Christian and hold high seats of power, but I need to recognize that I hold that high seat of power, not as the President of the United States or the Prime Minister of Australia, but as an ambassador for Christ. And it's a different perspective. We're called to be faithful witnesses. The church, present age, is an age of suffering and sin. and persecution and death and worldly empires. And then Jesus comes and he inaugurates his kingdom. And one day Jesus will come. And right now we live in that region with the star where there's this overlap between the kingdom that is and the kingdom to come. And the church is called to be ambassadors for that kingdom. And so, yes, we are called to try to influence and make changes and speak for what Christ would want, but we're not called to take power. And yet there's this temptation to take power. And when the world sees the church trying to take power, it turns them off the gospel. One of the ways that Satan will destroy the church, if he can, is to get the church to fall into the temptation that they should be in power, or to fall into the temptation of falling asleep because of the wealth that God has allowed for them. I want to finish with these two simple thoughts. In chapter 13, verse 5, and you read the whole thing in chapters 17 and 18, we read this. Authority to act for 42 months was given to him. Whatever exactly that means, what it does mean is that the authority of empire is limited. Empire will not stand forever. The gates of hell will not ultimately prevail against Christ's kingdom. The kingdoms of this world will fall. John wants his readers to get that. So when I'm tempted to hang my hat and hitch my star to some form of government and seek its power or its wealth or its control, what I need to stop and recognize if I'm going to be tempted to fall away and worship the empire, that those empires will not last. And John wants his readers to recognize that. And all of chapter 17 and 18 is an indication of not only the pollution of empire and the evil of empire, but its temporary nature. All of these will fail away. But God's kingdom will not fall away. I want to finish with these words. The kinds of people in the kingdom that we are supposed to be, rather than people that fall for false religions and false gods or seek the power of the kingdom or fall into the delusions of empire and kingdom, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the gentle, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. Blessed are those who have been persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you and persecute you and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets and those who were before you. We will overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And John wants his readers to get this idea. Whatever the futuristic view of the book of the Revelation is, the big idea is don't fall for the temptations of empire. It cannot last. It will seek to destroy your soul and that of the church. May we stand as faithful witnesses to Jesus until the end. Amen.